As they were saying, my name's Lisa Suter. I'm a brand new faculty member in the English department. Just got hired in the fall. I'm very excited. My PhD is in composition and rhetoric. So I don't do creative writing, and I don't do technical writing or journalistic writing. I am a person who studies academic argument. And specifically the entire discipline of rhetoric, going all the way back to the Greeks before writing was invented, and looking at how arguments are structured in oratory all the way forward to today, where we're going to put a lot of our arguments online, of course, not on paper at all. So that entire range and breadth. And those of us who work mostly with academic writing consider ourselves compositionists. Those who study the argument itself and how we persuade others of something, those would be folks in the rhetoric department. I straddle both. My PhD is in both. So today, as you know, we're going to talk about 25 easy ways to improve your students' writing. An emphasis on the easy. There won't be anything too tricky about this, but I think it's just a compositionist view that the structure of how we set up our writing assignments leads our students to feel that they can succeed, and we show them how to be successful through a lot of different modeling techniques. So I like to start by saying what this talk will be about and what it will not be about. There will be no math of any kind, no equations, but there will also not be a lot of theory and jargon, although that informs my talk at every point, and I can give you citations for the research if you're interested. That's certainly something I can do. I brought business cards, and I'm happy to have you email me if you want further information on any particular point. Also, what this talk will not be about is, it won't be just where is the magic grammar wand to whack the students with to make sure that their grammar is instantly fixed. If I had one of those, I would keep it for myself. It won't be about that, and it won't be about just combating plagiarism. Although, again, at the end, after I've talked for 20 or 30 minutes, we're going to have a nice, robust discussion, I think, about what our writing challenges are in our respective fields, what do we feel like we're having success with and what not. So we'll have a great discussion, and maybe those issues will come up. But what this talk is really mainly about is how to foster in students a sense that their writing matters, that they're becoming a part of the scholarly community, that they're learning how to become the scholars they can be, right? So talking to them as if their writing was actually as interesting as the writing that we do in our field, the writing that we read from our peers, and getting excited about their ideas, trying to show them how to be successful writers. So that's what we're really looking for today. One thought that I have as I set up this talk was just thinking about what makes human beings want to write in the first place. Not to be required to write because we've made an assignment, but what makes us want to write? A lot of us write for pleasure. A lot of us write to publish because we want our ideas out in the world. We want to be recognized for our genius or our brilliance, or maybe not so grand, right? But we want our ideas to be heard. We want to express some of our own knowledge. And this is what I'm really trying to tap when I'm working with my students, is to get them into a writing assignment that they can actually find out things that are very important to them, share them with one another, and perhaps even share them with the larger scholarly community. And that's where we're going to end the talk, is talking about how we can get our students there. So I've tried to structure your packet of materials so that you can follow along easily and not get confused by what I'm doing up here with this presentation. But compositionists for a number of decades now have been looking at how to get away from the idea of the product of writing and more talking about the process of good writing. How many different steps or layers there are in a sequence which is always varying and reflexive, so that students' work can be improved before they turn it in for a grade. Right? So there were other paradigms of academic writing called current traditional models, where we worked mostly with students' grammatical mistakes for a very, very long time. And we have Harvard to thank for that. I'm just saying, they set the standards of grammar in the nation way back at the turn of the last century. And for a long time, academic writing was just about grammatical mistakes and how to clean those up. And then we started looking at larger issues of how students learn through writing. Not writing as a container for an idea that's already happened, right? I had the idea, and now I'm going to put it in the writing, like a bucket. But how we get students to learn more by writing. And we started talking about writing as an epistemic process, so a learning endeavor, right? And we want to stretch that learning as far as we can. We want to spread it out so that students have more time to think with their ideas. So the process movement, one thing that you can do to get students set up for success right from the beginning is a very detailed assignment handout. And I have no idea what kinds of handouts you give to your students, and that's one thing I'll be very interested in. But I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. So if you flip to your pink sheet, see how nicely colorful it is. If you flip to the pink sheet, you can see these are a couple, there's a front and a back assignment. These are a couple of assignment sheets for first year success, first year writing classes that I taught in the fall. The first is a textual analysis of sitting Supreme Court Justice's memoir, Sonia Sotomayor's My Beloved World. And then on the flip side, you can see there's a rhetorical analysis where students are being asked to analyze an argument in the real world by an expert in their field about what kinds of qualifications they'll need to succeed when they get out of school, once they graduate. Now, there's a few things that I just want to show you here, and maybe you're doing some of them already, which is fantastic. I try to give students signals, not just in terms of length or how many sources I expect them to cite or what kind of citation I look for, but I try to give them what exactly the purpose of the assignment is. For example, I don't want them missing the fact that we're learning how to do textual analysis. This is something that people in all fields do. We work with different texts, but this is something they'll be doing over and over again. So we talk a lot about that. I talk about close reading. And we try to pull some of that vocabulary of the class into the assignment sheet to remind them what they're doing. I also try to talk to them and give them signals about things like tone, because tone varies in different genres. And what's correct for one genre or one field generally is not correct or is not as successful in a different discourse community. Right? So we sometimes tend to kind of think of the university as one big discourse community, but of course we really don't write the same way in our different disciplines at all. And I'm coming back to that point. That's very important, that we try to give students some sense of what it is we're looking for and what would be out of bounds. So I give them adjectives about, what kind of, how should their tone sound, and other things like when will the workshop date be, etc., etc., etc. You can see here on the flip side, on the rhetorical analysis, I've given them some pre-writing tips, how they can get started. In some assignment sheets, I'll give them sort of a template for a thesis statement. If they're having trouble with thesis statements, this is something that we'll workshop in class. But I try to remind them that this is how you can kind of set up a thesis statement to sound very scholarly. So all these different sorts of things. This is coming out of work being done at Northeastern also, I should mention. Northeastern has a fantastic research project in composition called the Meaningful Writing Project. And they've been doing kind of like a mini Nessie for many years, talking to students about their most meaningful writing project in the university. And they keep coming up with the same kinds of findings. So students like choice in their assignments. So I try to build some choice in, right? Within certain parameters, here are some choices you can make. They also, not surprisingly, want it to be relevant to their lives. This is not going to be a shocker, I think, but sometimes we forget it. So I try to have at least one major writing assignment in each one of my classes that's focused on getting them towards a goal in their life, either a career goal or some other kind of major life dream, some kind of academic goal. So that's what this rhetorical analysis is all about, and that's coming straight out of composition research at Northeastern. Other ways you can improve the writing process, besides the detailed handout, you want to make sure that you've given your students a lot of time. I don't know about you, but when I have a publication that needs writing, I don't sit down the night before, or even, the week before. It takes me quite a while to determine a good topic, to find something I'm really interested in, to get some initial feedback from other people. So you want to build a lot of time in, and you want to spend some class time writing. I know that it's hard to give up our class time when we feel like we have so much to cover, but this is really essential to getting students into writing mode, kind of getting those gears going early. Also, you're surfacing what are the problems they're having. What kinds of questions do they have? As they begin their pre-writing, they'll come up with questions. Am I allowed to use the first person? I don't know if you hear this a lot, but they have concerns, they have anxieties. I've been told I can't do that. And you may say, oh no, in this field we would not use the first person in this type of essay at all. Let me show you how a sentence would go. That kind of thing. So you're kind of giving them that little bit of time, and then you kind of go around and look at it. Scaffolding the essay. I think I gave you a few examples here of what we're talking about. Having them do little tiny pieces of writing that are relevant to that particular assignment. So for example, have students read and summarize a research article and talk about what is good summary versus what is sort of sketchy summary or a biased summary or a summary that doesn't show the best close reading skill, right? Submit a proposal perhaps with their thesis and key supporting points. I know a lot of professors in the writing department who have this done by email. It's 1 line or 2 lines, and some go all the way up to a formal prospectus depending on the size of the final project to come. But even just email me your thesis, and then you can give feedback quickly. An annotated bibliography, of course. There's lots of other ways, though, that you can kind of work little bits of writing in. I sometimes have a workshop on introductions or conclusions, or a title workshop to show them how to construct a strong academic title to sound scholarly. And we have a lot of fun with the colon. I'm just saying, quotes and colons, once they get started, they just can't put it down. These kinds of things are fun. Give them a sense they're learning something new. So my next topic here is thinking about all the many discourse communities we represent at this table and how many more our students are moving through. We're asking quite a lot of them, right? And they're very generous and patient in trying to figure out what it is exactly that you want. And you may have had this at some point or another, students saying, I'm just trying to figure out what you want, right? And my other teachers don't want the same things, as though it was like a personality disorder that we're all in. But what they haven't grasped yet is the idea of discourse communities, right? What counts as evidence in your field is not the same thing as what counts as evidence in your field. What counts as how to do notes or citation is different. Voice is different. Objectivity, the rhetorical stance of the author versus her research, is different. In my field, it's perfectly okay for me to insert myself anecdotally into my research in some types of writing. In a lot of scientific fields, that would be, you know, just a horrible faux pas, right? So they're trying to figure out what all these things look like. So one thing that I suggest is to give them a model essay to work with. Whether it's a good piece of student writing or whether it's a piece of writing from your field that's accessible enough, written perhaps for a more popular audience, this can be a good way if they read it as homework and you discuss it in class and say, what are the elements you note? What is the author doing here? Discuss conventions that are common. Can an author insert herself into the research, or must she analyze at an objective distance? Coming back again to adjectives describing the tone, try to give them a feel for that. How is supporting evidence introduced? All of those sorts of things. My final suggestion is perhaps one that's kind of, I don't know what you make of it, but I often share my own writing with my students. I find it's a really great discussion after I've shared my writing. Sometimes people are a little cautious about it, but I think it's nice when they're sharing their writing with us, that we share our writing with them, and we can talk to them about how we created this piece. Right? We can talk about that whole process. Here was the initial idea, here's what I thought I was going to write, here's where I thought the thesis was going, and then oddly I had this moment, right, where that changed. I changed direction. Where I had this previous piece and I decided to rewrite for a different audience. Here's how I made that shift. So talking about your writing process, your researching process, some of the obstacles you went through to produce this glowing research is going to be fun for them. At least I always enjoy those conversations. All right. Pre-writing. Nice little phrase for writing that happens before the formal or final piece, right? There's as many different kinds of pre-writing as you can imagine. There's just a ton of them. But we're trying again to get students out of that idea that I'm going to have an idea. It's just going to come to me, right? The muse will come and hit me on the head with this idea, and once I've got the idea, then I'll write it. But that's not really how our best thinking often happens. We're already in the process of writing all the time to other people in our field, emailing back and forth after a conference about an interesting paper you had, writing, you know, a research blog or a journal or whatever you keep to keep your notes. You're constantly writing about your ideas, and that's where you start to really learn and flex your intellectual muscle, and you see something surprising come out of that. So we want to get students doing the same thing, trying to use the writing to actually create new ideas for themselves. So we can use anything from kind of a graphic, a visual, mind mapping. A lot of students are more spatially oriented and more visual learners, and they appreciate being able to kind of map out an argument's points and what's connected to what. So mind mapping or webbing is another term that we use for this type of pre-writing. You can do timelines if you're doing a historical paper. Trying to remember who's in history here. But just getting them to kind of start graphing a timeline. What else do we have for pre-writing? Oh, I forgot the most fun one. So I do a lot of guided free writes where I ask them little questions, trying to like drag them along. But if they've already got their topics, I like to do something called zombie writing. This is something that compositions have come up with that says, you know, basically we're just kind of, you know, zombieing along. We don't really know what we're writing about, but it doesn't matter as long as you don't stop moving, right? So it works on several levels, actually, metaphorically. Because, of course, the zombies are in search of
brains.
People's brains. So you get the students moaning around for a moment, and then you say, now we must write, and we must not stop writing. Right? We have to keep writing, regardless if you don't know whether you're writing about the right thing, and you just kind of, and I often sit down and write with them. right, to kind of model, we're not going to stop writing for anything. That's a fun one.
How long do you usually do that for?
It can be what you have. I mean, I would say 10 minutes to really get the gears going is the smallest amount of time I would use. But sometimes, 15 is even more productive. And I just keep an eye on them and watch when their pens start to falter. But even 10 to 15 minutes, a couple times before a major assignment will be very useful. And then you can kind of ask them, what kinds of ideas did you come up with? Another form of writing that I think of as writing, and I talked about this in my job talk here, I call my room an epistolary classroom because I send emails to my students every week. Every class gets a letter every week talking about some of the key points and some of the ways we see rhetoric working in the world, and I try to point them to, look, this is what we just talked about. But I think that pushing email out to our students often invites them to write back to us about their questions, and I repeatedly ask them to send me questions and try to prompt them through email. So their inbox always has my email in it. So they can just click, and usually their questions are very, very relevant, very, very to the point, almost too to the point. I have to ask them to elaborate sometimes. But that gives me a chance to start that thinking, that pre-writing. Are you talking about this or are you talking about that? How are we going to narrow this field down? What sources are you thinking about? So we start a chat. And I think that's a very important form of pre-writing that gets overlooked. Easy enough to set up. Can also show you what you haven't talked about yet that's necessary. Sometimes their questions kind of give you the light bulb moment that, oh, I need to talk to them about X. Right? Another thing that is very big in composition theory, coming out of a compositionist named Kenneth Bruffy, is collaborative learning and how we can use peer groups to get students writing better. So I never have students turn in a draft that hasn't been workshopped in class. The key, of course, the trick, is how do I get them to take the workshop seriously and do some work with it. But if you can get the writing groups well set up, and you can get them on task, it's easy enough actually. I don't have much problem with it. Then what you see is actually at least a second draft. And as an added bonus, I know a lot of people don't want to give their precious class time for a workshop, but if you do a workshop, you're almost certainly going to see a higher quality writing. They may give you any kind of writing, but for their peers, they want to make sure that their work is seen as serious, right? A lot of them have that goal of I want to look smart in front of my peers. So that's a couple of things that are working in your favor if you spend a little time on this.
Can I just add a question?
Of course.
So I've done peer sort of like evaluations of each other's writing, so they had to share drafts, and then they had like a rubric to talk about the thesis sentence, a couple things like that. Is that the kind of thing you're doing, or are there other ways you can workshop?
There are all different kinds of ways you can workshop. So depending on what kind of piece it is, we do everything from reading aloud to sharing in advance. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. For example, I teach personal narrative. How do I work as a researcher from my own personal experience? So if I'm telling a story, it needs to sound like a story. And you hear that better if you read it aloud. It's just something that immediately sounds off. You can, of course, share work in advance and let them read it at home and then talk about it when they come into class. You can have them exchange and read silently. But there's all different variations even of that. So when we get to editing techniques, I'll talk about some of those more specific things. But things like reverse outlining, glossing, we can do syntactic workshops where we're just looking at the syntax of sentences, the structure of sentences. Find a couple of sentences that are really wonky, to use a technical term from the composition field. Very, very wonky sentences, and work on those. Or do you want to look at the more global picture of the whole piece? So there's all different kinds of workshops you can do. But yeah, the key is to get students to take them seriously. So a couple of things that I do that I have found very successful myself is to start off by saying, we're going to talk about what makes workshops not work. And most of the students in our classes have already been through high school workshops, and they all kind of groan when I say we're going to do peer workshops. And I say, well, why are you groaning? What's going on? And I say, you know, tell me what makes them useless. And a couple of people will raise their hands and very bravely say, no one takes them seriously. Nobody does the work. No one gives me any serious feedback. And I say, well, why do you think that is? And after a few more minutes thought, they think, well, maybe they're afraid of hurting somebody's feelings. Or maybe they don't think they're an expert. Someone will usually say, I don't feel like I should judge someone else's work. Because they think it's going to be taken as a negative thing. If I say, you could do this, that will be negative. And so we have that kind of starting to surface, what are the problems? And then maybe I show them, there's a wonderful short video on YouTube out of MIT, I believe, No One Writes Alone. It's like a 6-minute video, and they talk about how to do peer editing, but there's a lot of them out there that are nice. And I can send you a copy of that. But you can find it, I think, on YouTube, No One Writes Alone. Or we just talk about what would be better feedback. And then I say, you know, what grade are you searching for here? Doesn't everyone want to do well that actually is here today? And they all kind of, yeah. So I say, you know, let's try to give each other really good critical feedback. Let's talk about, again, what are our key points? What are our key elements for this assignment? We put them on the board. We talk about what's good. We go back to our model essay for a moment, which they always have a model essay. So what did you like there? And then we launch the workshop. And usually the students get right into it, and they actually give decent feedback. But it's a learning thing, even if not everyone is doing it perfectly. You know, they're learning how to assess and analyze and give feedback, which is helpful, and take it, which is harder. So that's something I like to do. They can also use social media for this. If they can't get to a workshop, or even if they have and they didn't get the feedback they want, I often suggest, well, you know, why don't you put this up on one of your social media sites and see if you can get feedback that way. And I've had some students who have really loved it. Oh, I had a friend at Brown, you know, who looked this over and told me about this, you know, or they're reading the same book we are, and we were shopping, you know, notes, which was really cool. Last semester, they were reading Sonia Sotomayor's memoir at Brown. A couple people just said, "Oh, get this great feedback." I was like, "Oh, that's great." The Writing Center. Let me plug the Writing Center. I'm sure you all try to boot students there often, but the tutors are really helpful, and I think a lot of students, Bruffy's research shows that students feel a lot more comfortable with a peer tutor, even though that may not be quite as precise a level of disciplinary feedback on their writing. Still, it's moving them in the right direction, and it's a good start. So I just want to plug the Writing Center. Give students new writing tools. Students like new technologies. I have to show you this. This is an actual typewriter from 1882. This is the Hansen-Malling writing ball that Friedrich Nietzsche used in 1882. They put it like this so you could put your hands all around it. I just thought that was too fun for words. But it doesn't have to be like the most exciting thing ever. It can be just Google Docs. Students love using that. We have, and I have not tested this yet myself, but have you seen these little flyers up on campus? We have live library research webinars on Tuesdays for students who think that it might be too cold to come into the library or just too much of a drive to come in. This is at our Aurora library. They're using GoToMeeting to give research help. If you have students doing research for their writing assignments, this is a nice little tool for them.
Every semester?
I'm just saying, I haven't used it yet myself, but these just came up while I was working here. So they were not up when I started, and then they started appearing on the library walls in November. So that might be fun. What else were we going to talk about? Oh, one of my colleagues, I haven't tried this one myself, one of my colleagues has extreme success using WordPress, the free blogging site, to have students keep a research blog for major research assignments. So they can set these up fairly simply. I'm more old school, and I usually just have them write paper and pen. But this is nice because he can look at what they're looking at, and students in the class can look at the blogs and see what other students are doing, what kind of success are they having, what kinds of challenges are they having, and they can leave comments. Oh, you're looking for this, it's not there, you have to look over here, right? So it's helpful in that way. So I'm actually thinking I'm going to try WordPress for my next research writing class. All right. So, editing skills. Talking about how we can do workshops. There's all different kinds. The one that I was talking about at the sentential level, just taking it down to the sentence level editing, is called WORMS. You can Google this, but it means what I really meant to say. So when students, this is something that a very famous compositionist named David Bartholomew wrote a very famous piece called Inventing the University about. In Inventing the University, he talks about where the kinds of strange and strained syntax and language comes from, with students attempting to sound like the scholars that are their professors, right? Trying to approximate academic discourse without really necessarily knowing how to do it. And you get some very strange sorts of English. So asking them to recast just a sentence that's not working by saying, what I really meant to say is this. And then you can prompt them in lots of different ways. So first stage of WORMS is go through your essay and find the 3 worst sentences. You can also do this with the best sentences. But they can just highlight them, right? And then you have them write WIRMS, what I really meant to say, and then you can give them a prompt. Say that same sentence using none of the same words. Say that same sentence in half the words. Use a completely different tone. Put the end of the sentence at the beginning. Right? You can do all these different kinds of things to show them how many different ways there are to write the same idea. Right? And I always use a model, so I'll start with a bad sentence from a former draft of my own. And I'll say, here's how we're going to do this. And I show them, we're going to use totally different diction here, we're going to use a different tone here, we're going to use different length here, and we're going to pick a new sentence and then work it back in. That's one that can take 20 or 30 minutes. Not saying you have that all the time, but if you've got 20 minutes, you can play with that. Glossing for your peer editing workshops, you're basically asking them to write a small summary of each paragraph and what's working and what doesn't on the sides, so making marginalia, right? Suggesting what they think is working or not working, anything like that. And then you can decide whether you want to assess that or not. I often say that I'm going to assess it, just to get them to do it, to make sure that they're doing it properly. And then I'll just kind of glance at it. But this is, again, something you're just asking them to give the writer feedback on what they see, paragraph by paragraph. Reverse outlining, this is something they can do with their own work. If they feel like the piece is unorganized, or if you feel that the piece is not well organized, you can ask them to summarize each one of those paragraphs on a different sheet of paper. Here's paragraph 1, here's what that's about. Here's paragraph 2, here's what that's about. And you're making an outline after the draft. And then seeing the skeleton of the organization right? So if you have just kind of, what's the arrangement here? There's no logical coherence to the argument. This can help students see what's out of place. And you could say, look how you could move this up to the beginning. And it's very easy to see in a reverse outline once it's done. That's for major revisions. For just proofreading, I don't know about you, but it's often astonishing how many proofreading errors we miss in our own work, and students are no different. So having them read their work out loud, that's one reason for doing the out loud workshop. They're always excited about that. I couldn't believe how many things I missed. I proofread this. And we talk about what reading scholars have noticed in terms of how the eye skips words, right? So as they study the eye movements of a reader from inside a laptop, for example, we know that we don't actually read every word. And the more expert you are at reading, the more literate, the more you skip. And then add in the layer of what you think you wrote, you skip even more. Right? So you're leaping ahead because you're assuming everything's there, and you miss the fact that you've got doubled words or whatever. So reading out loud, reading backwards. Has anyone ever tried that one? I was told to do this with parts of my dissertation. I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. That will never work. It actually works wonders. It's really amazing that your brain can read backward and can also notice that words are missing or I've put the wrong word. So that's kind of fascinating.
Reading upside down seems also, so I've done that.
Upside down?
Take this and turn it around and then just read.
Huh.
Wow.
And it's interesting what comes up.
Well, they've done studies that show that we can actually read fairly well when we scramble the letters in each word. Have you seen these?
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody just sent me something on email with that.
So that's kind of fascinating, right? The
Yeah.
brain can still figure it out even though all the letters are out of order. So we can do a lot more than we think. And some of these can be really nice proofreading tactics. If you don't believe me, you could try it by yourself at home, when no one's looking. And see how it goes. I often talk to my students about spell check too. Just talking about how it's sending them to the wrong words quite often, and try to get them looking at some of the better online dictionaries. If you haven't yet found www.onelook.com, O-N-E, one look, all one word, .com, it's a fantastic meta site for dictionaries of all disciplines. So everything from medical to science to what am I trying to say? Military fields. They've got all kinds of language discipline, language dictionaries, so they can look up Latin terms that they don't know. All sorts of things. It's phenomenal. I really like it. Responding to students' work is really a thing that I feel very strongly about. I think this is kind of one of the keys for me, is how we give students encouragement about their early drafts, their first work to us. I try to encourage them at every point to give me their best work and to indicate to them an expectation that I'm looking for solid intellectual work. And I talk to them a lot about their challenges and their workload and their schedule, and I know that they have these things. But I say also, this is university level writing. It's very different from what you've done before, and maybe you say the same thing. But when I respond to their work, I try to think about the kinds of response as a scholar that I would want, and the kinds that I've gotten that have not been helpful. And I try to guide my students in the same way by talking about their ideas and pulling out their best concepts, and always balancing praise for what they're doing well. And sometimes I have to really think about it. I have to really look. I mean, I'm not saying that casually or callously, but like you can just take a brief look and be like, oh my God, what's happening here? And then as you look at it more, you're like, oh, but here's the move that we talked about in class. And he is trying to do the thesis statement the way we did the workshop. You know what I mean? So you can call that out and say, you're doing a fantastic job with the thesis statement. But let's think about, maybe getting more than one paragraph after the introduction, right? So something like that, you know, and not too much. Nancy Summers at Harvard has done a great deal of research. She directed the writing program there for 20 years. She did a great deal of research on how much can students process. And her advice was 2 to 3 major concepts is about all they can handle, really. Because after that, it's just too much. It's all white noise. There's all these problems, so you want to think about, do I really want to address how their argument is flawed? Do I really want to address these little tiny errors, right? Which is going to be more productive for them in the long run. So that's how I try to think about it. Humor works. I like humor a lot. I often write some little joke to my students somewhere, some sort of nerdy humor, trying to indicate that I'm a human being reading another human being's writing, and it's not life and death in most cases. And sometimes students have talked about that in their final course evaluation as the thing they liked best, was that I didn't treat their writing as just a pile of problems, but it was a conversation we were having, which I like. So I want to make sure that we have time to discuss, and I'm running a little bit late because we started a little bit late, sorry about that. But just one last thing. One thing that I also try to do is to get students to publish their work. To think about where they can put their work in terms of undergraduate research journals, in terms of undergraduate research conferences. So of course we have a number of them here at Metro, which is nice. If you're new and haven't seen this yet, here's a flyer for our upcoming May 1st undergraduate research conference. But there may be one in your own department that I don't know of. There's an English one, for example, and it pulls in English undergrads from all over this area, as I understand, which is really very nice. And then they can see their writing as something more than an assignment, but rather a place where they're sharing ideas with the scholarly community or the wider community. I think that's very vital to them, to get that sense.